Yeah, I just want to say, Mike and I met. Mike does our BioSafe, antimicrobial fogging for our surfaces here. So that lasts 90 days. So anything you touch has already been, there's nothing you can get on there except dead microbes. So I'm touching dead microbes right now. And I met Mike and we were talking about it, and of course we all remember where we were on 9/11, and it's the 20th anniversary, and his story was extremely compelling. And when he told me he was a speaker and he would share his story with people, I'm so excited to have him share it with you, and kind of make us realize and remind us of how, one, fragile life is, and two, how lucky we are to have your perspective that you're going to share with us tonight, which is so important. So I'm going to have Sam, our community manager, officially introduce Mike. I just want to say I know all of you. I'm Patty Durrell, the CEO here, and I have some of my team in the audience and amazing clients. So thanks for coming tonight. And I'm going to sit down and enjoy this too, Mike. So thank you very much for coming. And Sam is the one that organizes all of these. So let's give Sam a big round of applause for organizing this for us. And Sam, you can take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming. So I have a nice little bio here. Bear with me. So Mike Fineo is originally from Long Island, New York. He received a Bachelor of Sciences degree from State University of New York. After graduating, he had a career on Wall Street as an institutional broker. After 20 years, Mike transitioned from the trading side of Wall Street to the information side, working for Bloomberg and then Wall Street Journal. In 2009, while working for the Journal, Mike accepted the opportunity to transfer to the Southeast, settling in Clearwater. Mike currently lives in Safety Harbor with his wife of 31 years, Roxanne, and he has 3 children, Nicholas, Brianna, and Samantha. And today he's the owner of BioSafe Services. So, and
thank you, Sam.
thank you.
So I think that really kind of gets us all into the mindset and remembering what happened that day. And before I give my typical talk, I just wanted to touch on the fact that it's incredible, right? This is the 20th anniversary already. It's hard to believe it's been 2 decades. And we've always done a great job of remembering 9/11 every year. And I'm just so proud, in particular of Florida, since I've been down here, and just by chance being invited to do all these talks. Florida is, in general, it's a military state. There's a lot of military here, so they really go above and beyond all these communities to continue and remember, and they always do something special on Patriot Day. But I think even more significantly this year, after 9/11, we pulled together as a country like we've never seen before, right? Or since. It was incredible. It didn't matter, where you came from, what color you were, who you prayed to. We just rallied behind each other and did all that we could to plow through this agony and this pain, and we knew we would get past it. When I walked on the streets in New York, before 9/11, it was just, out of the subway, down the street, go to work, and the same routine day after day. You never really saw and acknowledged people on the street, but after 9/11, you did. People went up to police officers and firemen and shook their hands and patted their back and thanked them. And we've gotten so far from that. The climate in our country today is just, it's really sad. I mean, if I could say one good thing that came of 9/11, and I don't know if that's even fair to say, but it did bring us all together as a nation. And I guess something positive coming from that is at least a good thing we could reflect on. And I just hope we don't repeat anything like this ever again, but it would be nice to see our country sort of get back to where we were, because America definitely deserves that. So my prepared talk. FIU, I have to say, they titled my talk why me? And when I arrived down there, I saw a poster with my mug on it, and there's this thing, why me? And I got really concerned about that, because I didn't want people to perceive why me, like, why did this terrible thing happen to me? Not realizing, even the way this was written, it explains what I mean by why me. And that's how I'll begin this. So why me? It's a question often posed to God by people forced to endure hardships. Ironically, it's the exact same question often asked by people who survive a catastrophe while others die. September 11, 2001 was a gorgeous, sunny autumn Tuesday. I took the Long Island Railroad to Manhattan and then the E train to the World Trade Center. I worked for the brokerage firm ICAP and got at my desk on the 25th floor at about 7:15. A typical day in every sense of the word. And then at 8:46, American Airlines Flight 11 slammed into my building. I was knocked out of my seat, and those standing stumbled to catch their balance. About 30 seconds later, there was another explosion, and as it was explained to us, a fireball of jet fuel had been jettisoned down the elevator shafts, and when it hit the lobby, it exploded. Many people left immediately. I and others did not. We never lost power. The lights were still on, phones were ringing, monitors and TVs were still on. We had no idea what had just happened. I remember thinking that maybe there was an accident at Windows on the World, which was a restaurant on the 107th floor. I wasn't near a window, but I was able to see glass and debris that was coming down. My concept of time is completely blurred, but after a short while, a colleague came running through the trading floor shouting for everybody to get out. I started to leave, and then for some reason I decided to go back to my desk. And when I did that, I tripped on the floor. I landed flush on my right knee, breaking a bone in my knee. But fortunately at that time, I didn't feel any pain. I got up and I went into our kitchen, and I don't know why, but there was a colleague of mine in there who was busy emptying out milk containers and filling them with water. And he said, listen, I was here in '93 when this happened. He shoved a stack of napkins under my arm, handed me a carton of water and said, if the stairwells fill with smoke, wet the napkins and hand them out and they'll filter the air. So I did as he said, and I headed to the stairs, followed by my boss and a few others. The main set of stairs that I went towards was huge. I mean, you could easily fit four of me shoulder to shoulder going down. And it was packed, and I couldn't get on the stairs. None of us could. And that was the first moment I started to panic a little bit, not knowing what we were going to do. And just then another colleague of ours saw us and he waved us toward him, and he knew of another alternate stairwell. And we got in that. It was crowded, but it was moving, and we were able to begin our descent. Still, no one had any idea what had happened. There was even a lot of lighthearted conversation on the stairs. Some guys were talking about going out, playing golf. It was a beautiful day. Fire department will get up there and take care of it, and we'll be back tomorrow. And then when we reached the 16th floor, Tower 2 was hit, and we heard that, and we felt it. And then the whole stairwell just went silent. Everyone realized this was no accident, and fear really started to settle in. I remember I tried to pray, but I couldn't remember words, so I just begged God for his help. People continued to enter the stairwell, and it got more and more crowded and slower moving. When we reached the 12th floor, we heard shouts from below to get off the stairs. The fire department was on their way up. So someone behind me opened the door to the 12th floor, and black smoke just started billowing in. So closed the door. We weren't getting off that stairwell. We couldn't. I remember literally pulling myself against somebody next to me, against the handrail to make room for the fire department as they came up. And I remember thinking, they were all my age. They were brave, they were fearless, climbing up and carrying all their gear. They were sweating, their eyes were like this, you know. They knew what they were getting into, but I don't know if they ever made it out. After the fire department passed us, the stairway opened up and we were able to descend more quickly. A friend of mine and I carried an older gentleman down the rest of the way. He had been struggling with his asthma and he had left his meds on his desk. So we just carried him down the rest of the way. At this point as well, water from the sprinkler system was flooding the stairs for the rest of the climb down. And then finally, when we made that last turn and we saw daylight, ESU police grabbed the older gentleman and got him out. And they were shouting, "Don't look." How could you not look? We had come out on the mezzanine level of the Trade Center. So there were two landings, two ground floors, I guess you could say. One is on the mezzanine level and one was literally on the ground, West Side Highway level. The mezzanine level was where you would go out into the courtyard between the two towers. That was where we came out. And again, the police said, you know, don't look. Looking straight out into that open area between the two towers, it looked like a war zone. It really did. There was broken glass and debris everywhere. Looking up, you could see that the building was still unsteady and swaying. The only way to describe it was that my mind could not believe what my eyes were seeing. Police directed us out of the side of our building. Again, I was in One World Trade, so that was the first building that got hit. And we were exiting to 6 World Trade, which was a smaller building. It was home of the U.S. Customs House, but there was an open air breezeway between Tower 1 and 6 World Trade. And there were police holding us back, and there was another police officer on the other side in 6 World Trade looking up and waiting for clearing, because there was debris coming down and there were jumpers coming down. Once I got into 6 World Trade, I got onto a pedestrian walkway from the World Trade Center to the World Financial Center. It goes right over that West Side Highway, and made my way into the World Financial Center. And then we went through that out onto a promenade right on the Hudson River. And there we kind of gathered and looked for other people that we might know. And that was the first time I was able to look back and see, you know, what was going on. And it was completely surreal. You know, both towers were engulfed in flames. The windows were filled with desperate trapped victims. We watched as people jumped, you know, people on fire jumping. I think one of the most traumatic things to see is 2 people holding hands and jumping together. The police came through the crowd, urging us all to leave that area. So we headed for the pier and boarded a ferry to New Jersey, even though I lived on Long Island. But my boss lived in New Jersey and he was urging us to go with him. And again, my concept at the time, it felt like probably a minute, but it seemed no sooner that we left the port, about a minute into our ride to New Jersey, we watched Tower 2 go down. And then Lower Manhattan just disappeared from sight. It was just covered in a thick cloud of dust. So we got off the ferry and we got on a train. It was an adjacent train station, and we boarded a train to Franklin Lakes, New Jersey, where my boss lived. And then the next thing you know, I'm standing in this beautiful backyard on this gorgeous day, wondering if this was really happening. And it then occurred to me that Roxanne, my wife, doesn't know if I'm okay. And it took hours before I was finally able to get through on the phone. And when we finally heard each other's voice, we could barely talk. I told her I was okay. And then we just cried. Roxanne and I were married in 89. And at that time, Nicholas was 9, Brianna was 5. Samantha was 9 months at that point. The next day I found a ride home, and when the car pulled up in front of my house, my emotions just soared. Roxanne and the kids came running out to meet me, along with our parents and other relatives, and my kids jumping into my arms and hearing them say "Daddy" was just the sweetest sound that I had ever heard. Roxanne and I sobbed as we embraced. I was overcome with gratitude to God and sheer joy at being reunited with my loved ones. I saw every aspect of my life as a priceless treasure that I had been privileged enough to return to. But why me? Why was I granted such a blessing while so many others lost their lives and their loved ones? Why did God allow me to return to my family? I knew that my colleagues loved their spouses and children as much as I loved mine, but so many never had the chance to see their families again. The next day I drove Nicholas to school, and then I drove to church to attend Mass. And as I walked to the church door, all the strength in my body just drained out of me. I literally needed to support myself on each pew as I pulled myself up to the front of the church. I collapsed in that front pew, and I cried harder than I ever cried in my life. All my emotions, fear, joy, thankfulness, love, everything poured out, and guilt. I've been blessed beyond measure to be reunited with my family, but what about all the others? Roxanne joined me at Mass. We just cried the whole time. Our priest came to see us after Mass, and I admitted that although I had never wanted anything more in life than to survive, now I struggled with the question, why me? What makes me so special? So many of my friends and colleagues died that day. They had young kids just like me. Why did they survive as I did? And he said, that's something you don't need to know. God has plans for you. It's not meant for you to figure it out, just trust in God. His words brought me comfort, but my grief for the others was still tinged with guilt. Life gradually returned to normal, although it was never the same. Life's joys have since been magnified. As for me, not a day goes by that I don't think about 9/11 to one extent or another. I would never have chosen to go through it, but I have grown because of it. Many people died on 9/11, and many, many more like me survived. Some of us have physical scars. We all have invisible wounds that never heal. I know survivors who never returned to work. Some returned to work and never spoke a word again about 9/11. Some changed their lives for the better, some for the worse, and some not at all. No one way is the right way. To each his own. My daughter once asked me if I like talking about 9/11, and I answered her with a simple, no, I don't. But over the years, I realized that hearing my story in some way helps others connect more personally to the tragedy of that day. I have been asked and have obliged many times to share my story. It's my way of doing something positive from having gone through this experience, from pain to purpose. I feel I personally owe it to those that I knew well that died. And now when I ask myself, why me? I'll never completely know why the good Lord spared me that day, but I feel I understand more today than I did back then. It's all in God's plan. And now, as I close this recollection with you, I want to share something very profound that I feel is very important for all of us to contemplate. And the first time I heard this was at a 9/11 event that General Mattis had talked at, and this is how he closed his talk. It's Eleanor Roosevelt's wartime prayer. Dear Lord, lest I continue my complacent way, help me to remember that somewhere, somehow out there, someone died for me today, as long as there be war, I then must ask and answer, am I worth dying for? Maybe never forget September 11th. Thank you. God bless. Thank you very much. Told you it wasn't going to be a real happy one. But every year when I give that talk, I say, it'll be easier this year than it was last year. And sometimes it's a little easier than it was the last time, but it just brings it all right back. And that's okay. It's important. I realize it's important. One of the times I was truly honored to share my story was at September 11th. It was a prayer breakfast for an organization called Remember, Honor, Support. And this was at the Coliseum down at St. Pete. So there were about 1,500 people there. It was beautiful. It was packed. This was the first time they went from a smaller venue to this big venue, and I was their guest speaker. And to be in the presence of all that brass, I mean, there was some serious military people from MacDill there. Admiral McCraven was there, amongst other generals and politicians and whatnot, and police officers from city departments and sheriff's departments from all over. And to have these people, and of course Gold Star families there as well. Some of them that came up to me, there were two that just really always stuck with me. One was a Gold Star family that lost their daughter, and they just said that hearing my story just in some way helped them realize that their daughter, didn't die in vain. There truly was, not that they didn't believe, of course, but it helped them heal, I guess, a little bit. And the other was a young Marine at that same event, came up to me, and he was in full uniform, and he waited in line, and he said, he had served 2 tours, one in Iraq and one in Afghanistan. He was young, and he said, of course I knew about 9/11, but I never, I guess, really considered it. He said, but now hearing your story helped him to realize that we really needed to be there, and everything that we were doing was necessary. And he said, please continue to tell your story, because guys like me need to hear it. So I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions or thoughts or anything you'd like to share about 9/11 and your memory of it. We all have memories of it.
I do.
Yes, please.
I was a librarian, and I went to work that morning, and I listened to the news on my radio in the car, and I get there, and somebody came up to me and said that airplanes have gone and ran into the
World Trade Center.
the Trade Center, and I said, no, couldn't possibly. I was listening to the news, and they said yes. And we didn't have a TV set in 2001.
Right.
So somebody brought a little one in, and we had to put rabbit
Oh my
on
goodness.
it, to see any of this.
Sure.
And it was just horrible at that time. But also, there was a gentleman who worked at the Pentagon, and he died at the Pentagon after having given to the library a book on the VFW.
No kidding.
No kidding.
Oh,
And
that's,
I went after they created that place where everybody's name was on, and
Yes.
I saw his name as well. So
wow,
it was just-
isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was something else.
You didn't have to be there to feel any different than I felt from being there. I mean, we all went through it together. It just so happened that I was in the building, but we all felt exactly the same things. Everything that was going through your minds was going through mine. Yeah.
How long before you went back into the city?
Well, we had about 600 brokers that worked we had offices in both towers. So we were on 25, and we had 2 floors, and we had 1 floor in Tower 2 that was in like 64, 65. And we got displaced all over the place. Whoever went to New Jersey or uptown, way uptown, or out to Long Island, or wherever we could find space. I ended up, Mike Bloomberg was running for mayor at the time. And what he ended up doing for us in particular was, and it was just luck of the draw how I got in this pool of brokers that got sent there. He had a building in right off Houston Street and the West Side Highway. And it was a very non-discriminant building. You could drive through it. Literally, Houston Street goes right through this building to the West Side Highway. And you wouldn't think anything about this building, but it actually turned out to be the brain center for Bloomberg. But he also had a vast amount of space available. So when I tell you, in a minimal amount of time, like maybe 2 months, he had equipped, I don't know how many of us, companies, not just ours, with office space. And not only space, he provided computers and phones and food. I mean, it was brilliant for him to do that as well, of course, right? Because next thing you knew, the Bloomberg system, which I ended up working for Bloomberg when I left Wall Street, that's like the benchmark standard tool that everybody on Wall Street uses, the Bloomberg terminal. But he never mentioned a thing about that when he was running for office either, which I thought was pretty cool. And then I got pretty upset with my company when they signed a 15-year lease to move to New Jersey. And that's what we ended up doing. So I was actually in one of Bloomberg's buildings on 59th and Park, which is a magnificent part of Manhattan. If you're familiar with Manhattan, it's really beautiful.
It's almost the corner of Central Park,
Right.
Street over.
Yes. So here we go from downtown, which was nothing special, to this beautiful. We called it Temptation Island up there. Beautiful people, And then sadly we all went. We had to be under one roof again, and that's when we went to the Houston. But it was to get. I'm all over the place. I didn't even answer your question. It was probably about a week and a half. Yeah, they didn't rush us back, and some, like I said, some guys never came back at all. Some people rushed back just because they needed to be there, but they had all the support that we needed. I did as I mentioned, I broke a bone in my knee, and probably the third night home, I was helping Nicholas do some homework, sitting at the table, and all I did was turn in my chair to get up, and the pain was just excruciating. So I ended up having surgery. I literally broke a bone behind my kneecap, and it held in there. I guess that's why I didn't feel pain right away, but eventually that motion dislodged it, and it slipped right into my joint, and so I needed surgery. And but yeah, going back was good. It was good and bad. It was good because it was great. The camaraderie between each other was just, we needed that. That was therapy. But we took that therapy a little too far, because my doctor used to say, you're all just self-medicating. And what we did was, at noon every day, literally every day, we went to the nastiest greasy spoon we could find with this bartender. I can't remember her name. She was wonderful. She was heavy Irish accent, cute as a button, and she let us just take over this bar, and we would have lunch there every day and drank till it was time to go home. And the bosses just kind of let us get it out of our system, and we did. And then going back downtown was hard too, because I used to go down to Ground Zero all the time, and that wasn't healthy at all, and even when we were in Jersey City, our office was literally right across the Hudson. So from our office, we could look into the pit every day. It was just always in front of you. But it's okay. It's all healing. Yes?
Did you ever think, though, you were talking about your knee, and when you said you were in the building, you didn't feel any pain. Did you ever think that if you would have felt pain, maybe you wouldn't have moved or been able to move, or even been able to come out of the building because you hurt yourself?
You
Did
know,
it ever come to you? Because you just said,
Yeah.
this didn't come to you until, the pain didn't come to you until you were home,
Right.
right? So I was just thinking about that. I'm wondering, you know, when you prayed to God and said, you know, help us or whatever, and that's the first thing that came to my mind about your knee.
Yeah, I like to think that I'm a deeply faithful person. You know what? Truth be told, though, I never gave that a thought. I guess because it was blocked, whether it was blocked
Right,
out of my mind or
Right, exactly,
emotionally, spiritually
exactly.
blocked. I don't know.
You
But
carried
honestly,
a
if
person
something-
down the stairs.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah,
With
yeah.
the
Me
broken
and
knee.
my friend
Right.
Bruce, we just kind of lifted him up and carried him down. Yeah, I didn't feel any pain. And frankly, if anything had happened to that point, I would have been able to get out. You know, I still had one good leg, and there was plenty of guys in that stairwell with me that would have certainly helped me.
Yeah, but you needed to take somebody out also, you needed to help somebody else, so
Yeah.
that was why you.
I
That's
guess so. That's one
Why
reason.
you
Thank
know,
you.
It's just that one person, you know, we think that we need to help hundreds of people, but if each of us can help one person, we're
Yeah.
helping hundreds of people,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
that was your
No,
purpose.
I appreciate that. That was
Yeah.
nice. No one ever said anything like that to me about it, and I told my story a lot. Never thought of it like that. Because I ask the question to myself all the time. And many things have, there's been many trials in my life since then,
Right.
No one's getting out of this life without going through a few trials, and I don't put mine above anybody else's. We all have our crosses to bear, but I'm grateful that I've been here to be able to help my family get through all of it. But never thought about that. That's pretty neat.
You also mentioned something at the beginning when you started, that we all came together as a nation, right?
Yeah.
So it's 20 years. How often are you telling your story? I mean, this is what we all need right now.
I know.
You know, when you're watching that and you're saying all of this, it's almost like we really need to be reminded how we were
We're
after,
capable of doing it.
what
We've
we
done
did,
it. Yeah.
how we really all came together. This nation needs something like that. Not that we need another
We don't need
9/11,
right.
but we need that reminder. If we were able to do it then, why can't we do it now?
It's so true.
You know, so it's
It drives me out of my
it's your
mind.
story. So how can you really get the story out so much more? I mean, you know.
Well, I'm
I don't
telling
know.
it a few more times this year.
That's great.
We videotaped it, so maybe we can, well, I don't know.
I mean, there's so many ways, you know, nationally or whatever, and I don't know. I just, as soon as you said that, I went, well, why can't we just do something like this then?
Yeah, I'll be, Remember, Honor, Support has kept me a part of their annual, so I've been there every year since. And so they've invited me back to speak again this year for the 20th. And that's a big event, again, at the Coliseum. And after the 11th, I'll be speaking for, forgive me, I forgot the actual name, but it's Retired Military Officers of America, something like that. I've spoken to them before as well. I've spoken to some amazing groups of people, Daughters of the American Revolution, a few of their chapters, some VFWs, and I remember, you could see, so when I get to certain points in my story, sometimes it just kind of chokes me up, and I was speaking, I believe it was a VFW, and it was a dinner. Most of the guys there, they rode in on motorcycles, and they were all, majority of them were Vietnam veterans. So I was a little intimidated to be there, only because I don't want to feel sorry for myself, and I don't, but I didn't want to come across that way in front of these, especially this group of guys, and one guy in particular, he just came up to me afterwards, and he was like, hey, you got to let that go, he had some choice words that he colored it up with as well. Just let it go, man. Yes, sir. But yeah, Yes, yes.
So you observed some really traumatic things and you experienced it firsthand, as did your colleagues.
Yes.
Were you able to access counseling? Were you able to, talk to professionals to help you through it,
I
not
did.
just self-medicate and?
Yeah, so
So-
self-medicating was, being on the other side of the bar for far too much. But fortunately, at the time, my son, he was 9, and he was struggling with ADD issues back then, so I didn't want to turn him into a science project. So I think we did all the right things. We ended up with a wonderful child psychiatrist, and Nicholas was seeing him. Dr. Ruby was his name, and he would see all 3 of us, my wife and I and Nicholas, and then he would talk to Nicholas one-on-one. But he knew, of course, that I was there, so he offered to talk to me, and it was the best thing I could have done, because he obviously this is terrible stuff. He diagnosed me with ADD right off the bat as well. I'm like, oh, wow. And it kind of explains my childhood to me now, some of the things that I went through. But then he was great to talk to, and he put me on medication. And that medication was obviously to help me get over the trauma of, post-traumatic experience. But to be honest, I'm still on it, because it really agreed with me. It had, I miss it if I don't take it. I don't feel too good, but it doesn't change anything other than the way I handle things. So it's been extremely beneficial that way. I know some guys just, they would never go and do that. One of my best friends, who sat next to me for the last 10 years I worked on Wall Street, he died a drunk. He lost his wife, he lost his family, he lost his job, and then he lost his life. And he just, we tried, because he was really drinking hard when we ultimately made it over to New Jersey. And, we had one of those, what's it called when you, an intervention kind of thing, right? Yeah. And we got him to agree to go away for a while, and he did, but it didn't last. And then he died probably about 8 years ago, just drinking, no family. Yes, sir.
There's a bunch of things that rush through me. The first, when a 107-story building shakes, not once but twice in 30 seconds, the fact that you didn't leave, like the concept of that, do you remember anything about that at all, or what you were thinking?
That much I remember vividly. The span of time I don't.
Okay.
But that I remember vividly. We sitting at our desks, 2 phones to your ears, just getting the morning going. And then the building hit us from the north side going south, and I was facing east or west, I can't remember. But I literally, and we're on 25, so consider this, right? Tower 1 got hit above 80 or 90.
Yeah.
I got knocked out of my chair.
Yeah.
And I'm that many stories below impact.
But
And
your
that-
thought had to be, what the hell was that?
Oh, absolutely. We heard it. I mean, clearly you heard it. Everybody was, F-bomb, holy, what the heck is going on here? And I remember seeing Mike Judge. He was an older guy that I worked with, and he was standing and he was stumbling to catch his balance. It felt like the building was listing and then it was just going to go, but it righted itself right up. And then, like I said, it seemed maybe a minute or a half a minute later, we heard another massive explosion, and the way they explained it to us was that fireball got jettisoned down the elevator shafts.
It's a quarter of a mile down.
Right, and as soon as it hit the bottom, it just torqued the building. And so what happened with that, on a trading floors are about 18 inches off the deck, right? Because they're running all kinds of phone lines and cables and whatnot. So when the building, after that second explosion, when the building torqued, all those floor panels all moved, yeah. Some of them buckled up, some of them, it just wasn't a flat surface anymore, and that's how I tripped. And even the ceiling tiles, like, we didn't have smoke or anything like that immediately, but there was, I guess, smoke from more dust than anything that was coming down because the building was still shaking.
But there was still enough normalcy that rushing out of the building at that moment didn't.
My phone was still ringing. I had customers I don't remember talking to them, but they were saying, you know, I spoke to you. I don't remember talking to you. I remember being on the phone, but I couldn't tell you who I spoke to.
The second thing in your story that struck me was when you finally got through to your wife, it just hit me that like that had to be the most memorable thing that she's ever had in her entire just being so distraught, not knowing, and then because my story, I was on the Port Jeff ferry when the first tower got hit, and not everybody had a cell phone at the time, but I did for work. And one of my colleagues called me and said, "You're not going to believe this, but a plane just hit the World Trade Center." And I was up, I don't know if you've ever taken the Port Jeff ferry, but in the front of the ferry, it was 7 in the morning or whatever time it was, but the front of the ferry was the bar. And the back of the ferry is where everybody sat that wasn't in the bar. But I would go over for work. And I always went to the bar in the morning because it's not open and there's nobody else up there. So and it had plugs, so I got up and manually turned the TV on and sitting there watching it. And I went to the back of the boat and told everybody, "Hey, turn the TV on, something's going on." And just as you did that's when the second plane hit. And it looked like all I can remember is it looked like a Cessna. Like it didn't, it didn't look, you're like, what the heck is somebody trying to get a closer look? I mean, what? But from that point on, I had to drive in towards the city. I was going to an appointment in Mineola, and I was listening to Imus on the radio, and he had Warner Wolf, who was in his home, which was right next to the buildings, reporting from the thing. And when the first building went down, and you're that close to the city, no one can get through on cell phones at that point. It was over. Like you couldn't do anything. So you're driving your car and you're just watching the people in the cars next to you are just completely broken down because they intimately know someone,
of course,
there, and they can't get through. And that's why I think your wife's, because I remember seeing people just so distraught over not being able to get in there. Anyway.
No, you're right, because I couldn't get any connectivity.
No, you couldn't get a
all.
connection at all.
Not at all. Not from. I didn't even think to try in the building, but once I got over to the financial center, I
You
just
still
couldn't.
could.
On the ferry, there was just nothing. Even when we got to Jersey, it wasn't until I was at my boss's house hours later, and at that point, so many people had come to my house. Everybody knew that I worked there, and you know the buildings were gone.
Yeah.
And they hadn't heard from me. So it was, all I could say was, I'm okay. I'm okay.
Yeah. Well, the last part of my story was I lived in Connecticut and I had come to Long Island just for the day. Well, the same story you had about going to New Jersey, there were several people from Connecticut that walked across the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah.
And they had gotten rides, they had, whatever way possible, you couldn't get off Long Island. They had the bridges frozen down.
Right.
And so there was the line of cars waiting to get on the Long Island ferry to get off lasted 3 days. It was the only way off the island. And so I went and I just parked my car in the next town over, and I walked about 3.5 miles and I walked onto the ferry. And what I remember is when that ferry landed in Connecticut, there was hundreds of family members just waiting for the people that got out to be just to reunite with them, because they had, they hadn't seen them since, and it was the most surreal thing. And I was fortunate enough, I lived in a couple towns away, but that Port Jeff ferry lands and you get on the train, and I went back 3 days later and got my car, and that was just a crazy day. But Karen and I knew one person a female whose husband died, and she was on the cover of Time magazine holding her baby a year later.
She was pregnant. She was
People magazine. Yeah, she was pregnant at the time that her husband died in the building. And so they had all the mothers with the newborns on the cover of People. And then another girl that I went to middle school with, her brother-in-law died. They both worked for the same company.
Cantor
Fitzgerald, yeah.
That's
They were on
most
the
of the
top.
people I knew that
Yeah.
died
Oh,
worked at
really?
Cantor.
They get a
So-
direct hit on their floor? Or
They
were
were
was
like
above?
on
below
105,
them.
weren't they?
It was below
It was
them?
below them. The company I worked for at the time was called Garban Intercapital. When I first started on Wall Street, I primarily worked in government securities and money markets. So Garban was what we perceived to be the place you wanted to work. Canada was always great, but they were great at what they did. What I was involved in, I really wanted to eventually work for Garban. Lo and behold, through acquisitions and mergers and whatnot, eventually we get to the point where the company I'm working for is going to merge with Garban. And if you didn't work at Garban, if you didn't get that job, you had to find something else. And so there was a small community of brokers that did what we did. And that was Cantor Fitzgerald, Garban. There was a company called Eurobrokers, Prebon, Tullett in Tokyo. There was just a small handful of companies. And most of the guys that I worked with prior to that merger went to work at Cantor. And so as far as Garban Intercapital is concerned, I lost one colleague who I didn't even personally know. She happened to be at a breakfast briefing at Windows on the World.
Yeah.
But we stopped counting after 100. We just knew so many guys between Eurobrokers, which was in two-world trade, and Cantor Fitzgerald. It was just some of these guys. I literally, I started in the business with. We knew each other. We spent way more time with each other than we did with our own families. Some of us never even met wives and children, but we knew each other like brothers, and those are the guys I really I think about 9/11 to one extent or another every single day. When my kids graduate college or high school, it's this emotion just swings both ways. I'm overjoyed and thrilled, and it just takes me right to those kids that lost their dad or their mom. And you were saying about coming off on the ferry. So that night when I finally got through to Roxanne, my sister offered to drive to the train station to get my car. And similar to what you said, she said it was the eeriest thing because
Cars were still there.
the parking lot was packed. And so Rockville Center was the town that I lived in. Rockville Center was a big commuter town, and a lot of people worked on Wall Street in Rockville Center, and we lost over 50 people in our town. And at the time, I belonged to the St. Agnes, which is the church in Rockville Center there. We lost 10 parents from our church alone. So my kids had classmates who lost their parents and whatnot. We all know somebody one way or another, but yeah, it was pretty hairy. And so that was right around the beginning of the school year, right? So we were having this back to school night, backyard party somewhere that obviously got postponed. And when we finally got rescheduled, I was there, and this was a wounded town, like all of ours, close to the city were. And there was a guy there that I had met who was a pilot for American Airlines. And so, we just started talking, and he said, Mike, do yourself a favor and write this down. You gotta write it down, if, not for your kids, for your grandchildren or whatever. And I used to find it easy to write years and years ago, but for whatever the reason, I just couldn't do it. So a few years after, I get a phone call, 9 o'clock at night. I just put the kids down, whatever, I'm settling down, and I got a phone call from a publisher. And somehow they heard about my story. I hadn't really told my story other than to people I knew. Somebody must have explained my story to them. Anyway, they called me, and they wanted to know if I would be interested in sharing my story with them. They're writing a series of books similar to like Chicken Soup for the Soul. This is called the Amazing Grace series, and it's a faith-based series of books, and this particular book was about fathers. So I said, sure. There was no royalties in it. They were going to send me 10 copies of the book, whatever, if it got published. Like, this is my way of getting it written, and I just wasn't able to do it. So they did. The publisher loved the story. It's the first story in the book, and I ended up getting some copies of it. And so I toned it down, and that story in the book goes beyond 9/11. It takes on some of the other trials that I've had to endure, and which circles back to why me. And it was a wonderful way of finally getting it on paper. So I don't know where that came from. But it's, yes.
What about your kids? Obviously, they have some memory. We were actually talking about Sam earlier, how she kind of had to learn about 9/11 through a school book because she was 3 when it happened. How do your kids share that story, or how they feel comfortable? Like, how does that work for you guys?
Nicholas he's still kind of a quiet guy. But as a child, he just internalized a lot. Like, he didn't want to stay home. He didn't want to miss school. He was afraid about things like that. When I hugged him goodbye, when I drove him that day and then went to church, I was bawling in the park, in the sidewalks saying goodbye to him. And he's like, Dad, what, why are you crying? And I'm so happy, Nicholas, So I think he doesn't open up as much as I do, basically, right? He's a little bit different from me. Brianna, my middle daughter, she was, I guess, 4 or 5 at the time. She had been to the Trade Center with me. I had taken her in for a couple of years. Every Christmas we had this huge party, and it was a blast, and she loved it. Nick never wanted to miss school, right? So Brianna's got all these great mementos, things that she made when she was at the Trade Center. But now, imagine this, right? So the Trade Center gets hit. Brianna is in an afternoon kindergarten program or pre-K program, so she's home and she's watching TV. She's not watching cartoons yet. I don't even know how the news came on. I guess maybe it just hit every station or whatever. And she's saying, Daddy's building. So, and Roxanne wasn't paying attention to this. And the way Roxanne found out was my father-in-law called and said, Roxanne, are you watching the news? And she's like, watching the news? What, are you crazy? And I just got Nick off to school. I got, whatever, my hands are full, I can't do anything. And he said, so you didn't hear what happened? And she said, no, what are you talking about? So he told her, and then they lived one town away in Baldwin, so they just hustled over and they were there. But that's when Roxanne heard her say that again, Daddy's building. She had been there a couple of times. Samantha, of course, was only 9 months old. She would have been 1 in December. And the very first time, now she knew about 9/11. She never heard my story. She knew that I had talked about it and things like that. And the few times that I had done it wasn't local, so she never heard it. So in 2013, when I spoke at the Coliseum, that was the first time she heard it from me. But she's a little like Nicholas. She doesn't want to talk about it. She knows. They're passionate kids, but they keep a lot close to the vest. But she's a lot like me. She really is. So, in fact, I don't know why, but there's a silver company in the UK. Our company is, most of the companies that were competitors of ours were all based in the UK. And they had these beautiful silver, they're not coins because they're thick, but it's a company like Tiffany. If you told me a name that you knew, I wouldn't recognize it, but it's a memento of the World Trade Center that they had made for all of us with our initials on it, just because I guess we were there. So Brianna has that.
Thank you.
So,
And Sam, if you ever get to New York, you should go to the memorial. It's
Yes.
amazing.
It's
Yeah.
unbelievable.
I've never been there myself.
I took Ashley,
Did you
because
go?
she's gonna be 21 next month, if she doesn't remember it either.
Yeah,
And I thought it was pretty important, so.
that's excellent. Yeah, the more I can talk to kids, like going to FIU was really, it was really exciting for me. You know what I mean? Because I was talking to young people about it. And it was multiple events in one day that I was there. It was really interesting because I really got to speak one-on-one with groups of students. But it's really important to me to, keep this going as far as younger, like my kids, Samantha's age, she's 20 now, and younger, that just don't know it. The old saying, and I'll butcher it, right? But if we don't remember the past, we're doomed to repeat it. Yeah. But I also heard one other saying, and I have a beautiful picture of the Trade Center with the American flag and Statue of Liberty, And, you know, I found this card that I put on that, and it says, seek justice, not vengeance, lest we become what we fear. I think that's really important too. So between the Eleanor Roosevelt prayer, which was like a punch in the gut the first time I had ever heard that, I'm like, wow, that's very profound, you know? And that's something we should all, you know, like you were saying before, we all need to hear and think about and consider.